70%. That is how much of an apartment's price a tenant in South Korea hands over in cash before she moves in. On a 400 million won apartment, that is 280 million won. About $215,000 wired to a stranger. Then she pays no rent. Nothing every month for 2 years. At the end, the landlord gives all of it back. Koreans call it jeonse. You will hear it described as rent without rent. That description is the lie. It is not rent. It is a loan, an unsecured, uninsured, interest-free loan from the person with the least money in the deal to the person with the most. It is not written down as a mortgage. It is not guaranteed unless you buy the guarantee yourself. And when the price of money moved in 2022, 39,669 people found out exactly what that sentence costs. 2 questions run through this film. The first one is how. How does a country of 51 million people run its rental housing on a system where nobody pays rent? Where does the landlord's income come from if it does not come from you every month? That question has an answer, and it is an old one. It comes from a time when money in Korea cost 18% a year. The second question is why. Not why the system was invented. Why it was allowed to keep running after everybody involved could see what it had become. Because 2022 was not an ambush. The Bank of Korea raised its policy rate 7 times in a row in public with press conferences. Apartment prices fell for 13 months straight, and the falls were published every month. The state's own guarantee fund was paying out record sums and reporting them. And the law that finally recognized the victims was passed on the 25th of May, 2023. After the funerals, hold on to that second question, is the one this film ends on. Here is the machine in its simplest form. A landlord owns an apartment. Instead of charging you rent, he asks you for a deposit, anywhere from half to 80% of what the apartment is worth. You move in. For 2 years, you pay him nothing. He does not owe you interest on your money, and he is not required to keep it anywhere in particular. He can put it in the bank. He can put it in the stock market. Overwhelmingly, he does the third thing. He uses it as the down payment on another apartment and finds another tenant to fund the next one. Koreans have a name for that too. Gap investment. Buying the gap between the price of a home and the deposit somebody else hands you for it. The legal skeleton is older than most people assume. The lease itself is written into Korea's Civil Act of 1959. The tenant protections came later, the Housing Lease Protection Act in March 1981, and then a large amendment in July 2020, which gave tenants the right to demand 1 2-year renewal and capped the increase at 5%. Read that list again because of what is missing from it. There is a law about how long you can stay. There is a law about how much more he can ask next time. There is no law that says the money still exists. The deposit is not held in escrow. It is not in a trust account. It is not on any register as debt. It is in his hands, doing whatever he decided to do with it. And your claim on it is a claim on him, which works perfectly in one condition. Prices have to keep going up. So picture the person on the other end of that arrangement. She is 29. She works in an office in Seoul, and she has been saving since she started, which is the ordinary Korean story and not a heroic one. She has about 80 million won of her own. Her parents can help a little, which they do quietly because that is also the ordinary story. She is not trying to get rich. She is trying to stop moving every year. And when she does the arithmetic on the 2 doors in front of her, the arithmetic is not close. Behind the first door, monthly rent, which takes a fixed bite out of salary that is not growing quickly. Behind the second, jeonse. Hand over the lump sum, pay nothing for 24 months, and get the lump sum back. Her own words to a friend will be something like this. Cool with the is not spending. It comes back. End quote. That sentence is the whole system. Millions of people have said a version of it. And it is true, right up until the moment it is not. And the moment it is not is never announced in advance. Now watch what she has to climb to get through that second door. Rung 1. She cannot simply buy the apartment. Mortgage lending in Korea is rationed by loan-to-value and debt-to-income rules that move with policy and the deposit she can raise is far larger than the down payment any bank will lend against her salary. Jeonse is not one option among several. For most of her generation, it is the only door into a decent apartment that is not monthly rent. Rung 2. She does not have 280 million won. Almost nobody her age does. So she borrows it from a bank as a jeonse loan secured against the lease. Sit with the shape of that for a second. She takes a loan from a bank so that she can make an interest-free loan to a landlord so that she does not have to pay rent. The bank charges her interest on the money she is lending to him for free. By October 2022, the Bank of Korea put the outstanding balance of those loans at 172 trillion won, about $132 billion. 17% of the size of the country's entire mortgage book, and roughly a tenth of all household debt. Rung 3. The man on the other side may not own anything at all. This is where gap investment stops being clever and starts being structural. If a villa is worth 300 million won and the deposit is 270, the buyer needs 30 million won of his own to acquire a building he can rent out. Do that repeatedly, and you can control hundreds of properties with almost no capital. Not by breaking the law, by using it exactly as written. Rung 4. There is insurance, and it is not automatic. The state's Housing and Urban Guarantee Corporation, HUG, will guarantee the return of the deposit. But somebody has to buy that guarantee. And until the rules were tightened in 2023, a property could qualify while carrying debt equal to 100% of its own value. Insurance sold on the collateral that is already fully pledged. When the country's largest single landlord died, and his tenants were counted, 614 of them had bought the guarantee. 525 had not. Rung 5. The price of money. In May 2020, the Bank of Korea's policy rate was 0.5%, the lowest in its history. Then inflation arrived, and the bank raised the rate 7 meetings in a row to 3.5% on the 13th of January, 2023. That is 7 times more expensive money, and every single step of it was announced in advance. Apartment prices went down 3.12% across the country in 2022. The sharpest annual fall since the Asian financial crisis in 1998, when they fell 13.5%. The National Apartment Index then fell for 13 consecutive months. And here is where the machine eats itself. When your 2 years are up, the landlord repays you with a deposit from the next tenant. But the next tenant will only pay what the apartment is worth now, which is less. Koreans gave that its own name too. Reverse jeonse. The landlord does not have your money. He has an apartment that is worth less than what he owes you, and a tenant behind you who will not fund the gap. Let me put you inside it, because the numbers do not land until you do the transfer yourself. Imagine you have saved for 6 years. Imagine your parents have added what they could. Imagine you're sitting in a real estate office in Seoul with a bank officer's approval on your phone, and in front of you is a man you have met exactly once. You press confirm, and 280 million won leaves your account and enters his. There is no escrow. There is no trust account. There is no third party holding it until the lease ends. What you get in return is a contract, a date stamp at the district office, and a position in a queue. The queue of people who get paid if this apartment is ever sold at auction. If a bank lent against this building before your date stamp, the bank stands in front of you in that queue. You will not think about the queue. Nobody thinks about the queue. For 60 years, the queue has been theoretical because prices went up and the next tenant always paid more than you did. You're not being reckless. You're doing the normal thing in the normal way in the ordinary week of an ordinary year. That is what makes this a story about a system and not a story about foolish people. So where did this come from? Why would any country build its housing on a system that only works while prices rise? Because when jeonse grew up, it was not a strange arrangement. It was the best deal available to both sides, and the reason is on this chart. This is the 3-month interbank rate in Korea, the price of short-term money. In 1991, it was 18.3%. In 1998, in the middle of the Asian financial crisis, it was 15.2%. Look at what that does to the arithmetic. If a landlord is handed 200 million won and money earns 18% a year, that deposit throws off 36 million won a year without him doing anything. He does not need rent. Rent would be a rounding error next to what the deposit itself earns. Now stand on the other side. In the 1970s and 80s, ordinary Koreans could barely borrow at all. One study of the period finds that only around a tenth of home buyers used a mortgage, at loan-to-value ratios under 30%. The banks were lending to industry, not to households. So the tenant could not buy, and the landlord could not borrow, and jeonse solved both problems in one contract. The tenant became the landlord's bank, and in exchange got housing at a price that looked like zero. That is the answer to the first question. Jeonse is not a rental system that went wrong. It is a private lending system invented to route around a banking system that did not serve households, and it worked beautifully for 4 decades. Then the price of money fell to nothing, and the whole logic quietly inverted. The 12th of October, 2022. A hotel room in Seoul. A man in his 40s is found dead. Police examine the scene and find no evidence of foul play. In any other week, this is a paragraph in a local paper. It is not because of what the man owned. His surname was Kim. Korean media gave him a title that stuck, the Villa King. He held 1,139 properties, villas and officetals, the small multi-unit buildings where young people and low-income families rent. He had assembled them the way we have already described, gap by gap, deposit by deposit, with almost none of his own money in any of them. And now he was dead. Here is the part that nobody involved had thought through. A jeonse deposit is a debt, and debts do not die with the debtor. They pass to the estate. The tenants of those 1,100 apartments needed a signature to get their money back, and the only person who could give it was gone. Heirs can refuse an insolvent estate, and an estate stuffed with buildings worth less than the deposits attached to them is exactly that. So the tenants were left holding a claim against a dead man, in a market that was falling, with a queue in which the bank stood in front of them. When police first counted the immediate cases in December 2022, they put the confirmed losses at 17 billion won. By the middle of 2023, the unpaid deposits linked to his portfolio were reported at 54.2 billion. Of his 1,139 tenants, 614, 54%, had bought the state guarantee and would eventually be made whole. 525 had not. That number is the entire episode in miniature. Not a scam that fooled clever people. A default risk that half the country did not know it was carrying, priced at zero for 60 years. And then INCHEON, west of Seoul, in a district called MICHUHOL, a man named Nam Hyun-ji had done the same thing on a larger scale and with intent. Prosecutors said he built and controlled around 2,700 flats. In January 2024, the INCHEON District Court sentenced him to 15 years. Korea's Supreme Court upheld it in January 2026. The press called him the Construction King, and the nickname does more harm than good because it makes this sound like a story about 2 flamboyant criminals. It is not. Look at what the tenants of MICHUHOL were actually facing. By the 19th of April 2023, 2,479 households in that one district had been officially recognized as victims. 1,523 of their homes, 61.4%, had already been put up for auction. 87 had been sold. Now remember the cue from earlier. When a building goes to auction, whoever registered first gets paid first. And in these buildings, the mortgages were registered before the tenants moved in. The apartment sells. The bank is paid. The tenant, whose deposit was the largest single sum in the entire transaction, is paid whatever is left, which is frequently nothing at all. The mistake was not made by the 29-year-old in the real estate office. It was made in every year that a system routing a third of the national economy through unsecured private loans was left with no register, no escrow, and no default insurance that anybody was required to buy. The 28th of February, 2023. MICHUHOL, INCHEON. A tenant in her 20s is found dead in her apartment. Her deposit was gone. Her building was scheduled for auction, And she had been told, in the way these things are told, that there was a process and it would take time. By the middle of April, 2 more residents of the same district had died. A fourth followed on the 24th of May. Reporting differs on the exact days of the middle deaths, and I'm not going to pretend to a precision the record does not support. What is not in dispute is the sequence. People lost their deposits. People were told to wait. And then, in one district in one spring, 4 of them did not wait. On the 25th of May, 2023, the day after the 4th death, the National Assembly passed the Special Act on jeonse fraud victims. It took effect on the 1st of June. It created an official category of victim, a committee to recognize them, priority purchase rights, and emergency loans. Read the timeline in the order it happened, because the order is the argument. The rate rises were public. The price falls were published monthly. The Villa King story ran in national newspapers in December 2022 and in the Washington Post the same month. The deaths began in February. The law passed in May, after the 4th. But the biggest number in this story is not in any court file. It is in the accounts of a state-owned guarantee company, and it arrived after the headlines had moved on. When a tenant holds a HUD guarantee and the landlord does not pay, HUD pays instead and then tries to collect from the landlord. Watch what that cost. In 2021, HUD paid out 504 billion won on behalf of landlords. In 2022, 924 billion. In 2023, 3.55 trillion. In 2024, 3.99 trillion won, an all-time record, roughly 8 times the 2021 figure. Then collection. Between 2013 and August 2024, HUD had paid out 8.51 trillion won in total and recovered 1.93 trillion of it, 23%. Its annual recovery rate went from 100% in 2017 to 8% by 2024. In other words, for 2 years the Korean state was the renter of last resort in its own rental market, paying deposits back on behalf of landlords who could not, and getting less than a quarter of it back. And this is the chart I have been holding until now. It is not the price of apartments in the headlines. It is Korean house prices adjusted for inflation since 1986. The peak is 1990. The bottom is 2001, a fall of more than half. There is a recovery, and then 2021, and then a 14% drop in 3 years. Look at where the line ends. In real terms, Korean housing in 2024 is worth about 70% of what it was worth in 1986. The collateral behind every single one of those deposits, the thing everybody assumed only went up, has spent 40 years going sideways and down. So, the second question, why was it allowed to run? Not because nobody understood it. Because for 60 years it was the cheapest housing finance system in the developed world, and it did something no government program managed to do. It gave a generation of Koreans a way into a decent apartment with no rent and no mortgage, while the banks were busy lending to shipyards. Every part of the fix cost somebody that. Force landlords to hold deposits in escrow, and the gap investor cannot buy the next apartment, so the supply of jeonse units shrinks. Make the guarantee compulsory, and the price of it lands on tenants. Kill jeonse outright. And the alternative is monthly rent, which is money that never comes back. So nobody killed it. It is dying anyway. In 2022, 48% of new leases in Korea were monthly rent. By 2024, 57.9%. In the first quarter of 2026, 68.6%, a record. In Seoul, monthly rent has passed half of all apartment leases for the first time. HUD's payouts finally fell in 2025 by 55%, and its recovery rate jumped back to almost 85%, largely because the guarantee rules were tightened and worse properties stopped qualifying. The number of officially recognized victims stands at 39,669 as of the end of June this year. 3/4 of them are in their 20s and 30s. And the ending nobody in Korea is celebrating is this. The system that let young people live rent-free is being replaced by one where they pay rent every month forever and never get it back. The deposit was a strange, brilliant, dangerous machine. It is being switched off, and what replaces it is simply more expensive.